Which one got the meet and greet?
Good evening. The Rutherford County Steering Committee is called to order. At this time, I would call on Vice Chair Brad Turner for the reading and approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had a chance to review the minutes. I find them in order, and I make a motion for their approval.
A motion, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. At this time, we will announce a vacancy on the Correctional Work Center Board. Also, we would like to call on Commissioner Robert Stevens and invite Chancellor Howard Wilson to one of the tables here for the presentation of a new circuit court judge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, I gave everybody the handout from the Chancellor that has information about the caseloads per judge in each district in the state. And as you'll see, we're about 1.5 circuit judges short of where we should be right now based on those statistics. And this discussion was had at Public Safety a couple of weeks ago, and that committee recommended that we send a resolution to our state legislators and ask them to create a new circuit judge position in time for the elections in August, so that the people can elect a new judge and that person could take office and help us with this shortage. But Chancellor Wilson's here, and I'm sure he can much more eloquently tell you about the needs than I.
Well, I don't know about that, but I appreciate it. Can everybody hear me fine? Or
I tell you what, why don't you maybe take a mic on the table?
That's Mike.
Or you can stand in there. And just push up.
All right, how's that? All right, Chairman Gooch, the members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Of course, I'm certainly in support of Commissioner Stevens' resolution to ask our state delegation sponsor a bill for a new state judge position here in Rutherford County. It's been since 1998 that since we've had our last judge position created, and certainly you can tell, and I know that Commissioner Stevens has passed it out, it's a lot of information, but you can see we're District 16, and if you look at the what's called the weighted case study, it shows you that our judicial district, which is Rutherford and Cannon County, has been down more than one judge ever since they started keeping track of the cases that we hear. Currently, we hear between the 5 state judges, we hear about 11,000 cases a year. So it's certainly something that's needed in our judicial district. We're about 1.5 judges, too few as we currently sit. Of course, this is a state trial judge position. It's not a county-funded position, so really, I think what Commissioner Stevens is asking and what I'm supporting as presiding judge, and I know I speak for the other trial judges in our district, that we're just asking for a resolution recommending to our state delegation who's here tonight that they look at a bill to create a new position for us. Certainly, any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
And this came out of Public Safety with a positive recommendation, I believe. Committee, are there any questions or comments to Commissioner Stevens or the Chancellor?
Is the funding, again, is it completely state funded? Did I misunderstand?
It would be on the state budget. I'm sure there may be some secondary cost that the county would incur, but I believe that would be minimum. And the mayor's here to...
Well, if I could address that, just full disclosure, the county does provide each state trial judge with a law clerk. And that's about, I think, about $35,000 salary a year.
State provides our office?
State provides, well, of course, we're in the courthouse, so the county provides our offices for us. But the state does provide our secretary. The county provides our law clerks.
That answer your question, Commissioner P?
Yes.
Anyone else? Commissioner McAdoo.
Also, I would like to point out, we got that new judicial building. In the past, they hollered we didn't have enough space or so on and so forth. So we can put that out of our mind. We will have space to accommodate this new circuit court judge.
Anything else? At this time, I'll ask for a recommendation to send this to the full commission.
Chairman, I'll make a motion that we send a resolution to our state legislative delegation and ask them to sponsor a bill to create a new circuit judge position for the 16th Judicial District. And also, if we could send a copy of that to Cannon County as well, they're asking their delegation.
There's a second. There's a second. Discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Chancellor. Commissioners, on your iPad, you will see a list of our litigations. At this time, we will have our meeting with our state legislators.
Mr. Chairman, if I can interrupt real quick, did we announce the vacancy on the Conservation Board, or did I miss that?
I announced the vacancy on the Conservation Board. I may have misspoke and said it was the Correctional Work Center.
Okay, I just wanted
But
to.
I do stand corrected. There's a vacancy on the Conservation Board. So we'd like to welcome Senator Bill Ketron, Representative Don White, Representative Dr. Brian Terry, and Representative Mike Sparks. I do know that Representative Tim Rudd is on his way, and he's, I think he's held up in the traffic situation, legislators. So how we would do this is each committee member will ask a question or state a concern. Each representative would be allowed to respond to that if they so desire. When the committee has spoken, we will go to the audience and ask any commissioners, any constitutional officers, including the mayor, if they have any questions or comments, and I'll just ask them to get a microphone at the table. At the first question, I'll invite you to just do a brief introduction. And I will start off. So my question is, there's a opioid crisis in the state of Tennessee, I believe. Last year, I think we talked about meth. I would like to know if there's any legislation that you see coming up as far as regulating this medication. As someone who works in a pharmacy, I see that the pharmacists are bearing a lot of the blunt of having to regulate pill mill doctors ourselves. So if you could kind of speak to that, I appreciate it.
Thank you for allowing us to listen to y'all's concerns. And from the opioid issue, I do know that the pharmacy, the association, they're looking at some legislation. I've actually spoken with them about some potential bills. I believe one thing that we're looking at, when you get a prescription, you have, I believe, maybe up to a year to have that filled. I think the standard is around 6 months, though. We're looking at having that when you get a prescription, having within 2 weeks, you have to get that filed.
Okay.
And then you would have, depending on if it's acute or chronic pain, maybe 3 or 30 days to get it filled, or maybe 60 days to get it filled. Speaker Harwell and her task force, they had some discussion about length of prescriptions and whether or not there will be a bill about that, whether it's 7 days, 10 days, whether it's acute pain, whether it's chronic pain, because the issues that we do have on patients that are chronic patients, if you're in a rural area and you have to get it, if you only can get a 10-day prescription, but your physician, which you have to get it from them, is in Nashville, it's a hardship on those types of patients. So having legitimate patients and legitimate providers in mind, whether or not a bill comes forth for that, I don't know. I do know that at our hospital they're looking at, well, our ER, they do self-regulate their amount of prescriptions that they, length of time that they do have them. But anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Well, and a lot of times, I mean, they're there that day with their prescription. I guess my concern was how would the doctor's office, any regulations there? And it may be just something to be conscious about if any legislations come up concerning that.
Yeah, I think there's actually been some discussion. I've had some concerns from pharmacists that when they know that there might be a pill mill out there, they're concerned about, I think there might have been actually a lawsuit about that, where they might have been a whistleblower, and they might have actually lost. That wasn't in this county, but I think it was somewhere in the state that I've heard about that. There may be something on the horizon where we have a more open discussion or way for people to have their concerns heard at the Department of Health and for an investigation into possible pill mills. We have actually, over the past few years, though, had a decrease in the number of prescriptions, and so we are making some progress on that front.
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. We thank you again for allowing us to come and share with you some ideas. I just want to impart that we're not taking this lightly. The opioid crisis is something that we're all embarrassed about. We rank in the top 2 or 3 abusers in the whole country, and that's something that embarrasses me. And so we've got everybody from law enforcement, TBI, everybody working on this, down to the Tennessee Medical Association, Tennessee Hospital Association, everybody, all the stakeholders that are involved in this. And the governor on down, we're taking this very seriously because it affects so many people in our state. One thing from a law enforcement standpoint we're concerned about is the cartels that are working within our state, because it's easy to traffic because of our interstate system coming in on 40 from far away as Mexico, and many of the cartels are beginning to cut some of those opioids with fentanyl, and which is highly, it's probably 100 times more powerful than morphine. And we start getting that on the streets, then we've got real issues. And I think we've had some deaths. But the number of deaths that are occurring in our state, we're working as fast and hard as we can. And I think there'll be a lot of discussion when we go back into session next week over the course of the next 2 or 3 months.
Again, thank you so much for having us. I always enjoy listening to what is important to county commissioners representing Rutherford County, as well as just to hear your concerns as well. Of course, opioids are going to be one of the top priorities of the legislative session, I believe. We're going to pass legislation. We've talked to even, the Nurses Association. I've talked to them. I've talked to pharmaceutical people that McKessick, and we're all at the table trying to come up. There are more prescriptions for men, women, and children prescribed than there are men, women, and children in the state of Tennessee. So we realize there is definitely a problem. It's going to be on the forefront. The speaker did her task force, Dr. Terry said, which I think a lot of great information came out from there this summer. Dr. Terry was lucky enough to be on that task force. So it's definitely on our minds. We're working, all parties are working together to come up with a solution to end this, because it's costing the state of Tennessee billions of dollars every year. So we're definitely looking at it.
And I know that you will, but any discussion just to ensure that the Board of Pharmacy has a good seat at the table. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit on fentanyl. I'll be filing a bill with Senator Dickerson, who's also an anesthesiologist. Currently, narcotics are Schedule II drugs, and with the illegal sale, manufacture, distribution, that's a Class C felony. And our bill is essentially, if you have greater than between 1 to 100 lethal doses of a narcotic like fentanyl, sufentanil, carfentanil, or their analogs, it'd be up to a Class B felony. If you have over 100 lethal doses, it'd be a Class A felony with guaranteed time served that you would have in that. So those are some of the things, and we always have the Pharmacy Association involved in this.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I think you knew my stepfather was a state investigator for the Board of Pharmacy and recently passed away. And I remember what Dr. William Chance told me. He says, Mike, you'll always have the drug problem with you. He said, all you can do is try to curb it. You'll never be able to solve it. And legislation obviously hasn't been working throughout the years, but more attention to treatment and addiction. And I think the pendulum is swinging where people are seeing that there's a need. I'd done something that was kind of strange. I took my opponent to lunch after I won years ago, Kent Coleman. I said, Kent, how come nobody cares about the drug problem? How come no one's talking about addiction and the drug problem? And he says, Mike, if folks have never been touched by the problem, they probably don't care. And he tells me to get on the health committee, which I did, So it was good advice, the best advice I ever got, and that was ironically enough from my opponent. But I appreciate you bringing that up, and I appreciate it being on y'all's radar, and I really wish the school board would also chime in on this issue, because it's happening in our schools. Addiction is everywhere, and the next crime that's going to occur in the next 5 minutes is probably going to be drug related. But thank you for bringing it up. Speaker Harwell, by the way, will be on the radio with me, WGNS, at 10:20 in the morning, talking about this very issue. So if y'all get a chance, listen to WGNS tomorrow at 10:20.
Thank you, Representative. I will start on this side of the table. If Commissioner McAdoo, if you have a question or comment.
I see they probably already know what I'm going to ask, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. It's our road condition. Last month, we sent another recommendation on Rocky Fork to the state. But my question is, do we need to be the ones to specify which road project, or should we send all the road projects down there that we have and let the state be the one that prioritize these projects? Should we prioritize on the local level, or should the state prioritize on these road projects in Rutherford County?
The beginning of your question was Rocky Fork. And so have you got two questions? One about prioritizing the state. Commissioner McAdoo, we depend a lot on you because you drive those roads every day. You're on the road board. You all see it, so we need to hear from you. The state's going to, of course, know. They know the traffic counts as well. But to prioritize those, Rocky Fork, let's talk about Rocky Fork real quick, because I know that it's an issue down in the northern end of the county. I talked to Paul Deggs today, and he said it's my question, and I don't know if any of you, one may know, Commissioner, has the interstate improvement access request been applied for at the federal level? There has to be a form, and it's called the Interstate Improvement Access Request, and that form has to be filled out. So I'm saying either from the county's respect or from the city of Smyrna. So you may want to touch base with the mayor to see if they filed that. And once that is the trigger, once that's filed with the federal government requesting an interchange at Rocky Fork, then you have 8 years. The time starts clicking at that point. So you have 8 years in which to try to complete that turnaround. Commissioner?
Mr. Kettler, in response to that, I'm aware that, I don't know whether a new one or a recent one has been applied for or not, but I know it's been rejected a couple of times, if I'm not wrong.
Well, if I don't know how far back that goes. I know Senator Tracy and I worked on it at some point in time. That's been 4 or 5 years ago. We met some folks who had some property down there. But Paul told me today, or Assistant Commissioner Deggs told me that at the end of that 8 years, then that expires and you got to start all over again. So that may be where we are today. I don't know, but he says that he could probably come up with about $4 million for improvement, because before you can put in that exit, the city is going to have to improve Rocky Fork, or whoever, if that's inside the city. If it's the county's going to have to spend that. And he said he can come up with about $4 million for the improvement of Rocky Fork getting to the exit of the interstate. And then probably he can pull together some more funding from the state level for the interchange itself, but I know how important that is for the growth, continued growth of Smyrna.
I recently, to follow up with what Senator Ketron said, he's exactly right. I recently met with TDOT at their facilities in Nashville and got an overview of everything going here, plus other things that they do. And that came up, and they said they've talked to the city of Smyrna to put that exit in. I think TDOT's estimate is about a $20 million project. And they said they can't justify that kind of expense with just a two-lane country road there. They know heavy traffic. The city has got to widen that and put a parkway to the exit to justify that kind of expense. And I don't know whether the state can help with that or not, but that's the biggest problem there.
That was the $4 million that they offered today.
So they said that's the biggest problem with that. They're willing to help, and they see the need for it. And, of course, Smyrna's trying to plan out for the future. And for future development coming in that area, because there's a lot of undeveloped land there. But that's the biggest reason the holdup there is because there's no justification of anything at that exit.
Chairman, I wanted to mention, I talked to TDOT the other day, and I talked to an engineer that's working the Spring Hill interchange at 65, and I was asking this gentleman who's been around this process for years, and I just asked him, I said, what can we do to speed this process up? And he said, man, if I had that answer, brother, I'd be living in Florida, man. I'd be kicking back because I'd be going to the bank with this. But it's challenging, no doubt. Smyrna's done their due diligence from what I've known. I talked to some of their folks the other day, and they're planning on building out Eden Springs Road to that interchange. But I'll tell you something, what used to wear me out on this was Bob Spivey, the late mayor, Bob Spivey. And him and I were pretty close. I considered him my mentor, and I told Bob, I said, Mayor, it's not going to happen in your lifetime. And I hated to be that direct, but he really wanted to push it. But I said, Mayor, it's just not going to happen in your lifetime. And he wanted to see it done, and I gave him my word that I would do my due diligence on this. But I know Smyrna's been, I think they've tweaked that plan, Senator Ketron, to go back to TDOT to then go to the Federal Highway Administration. So I think it's in the works. I presented y'all the packet tonight with all the projects that's coming to Rutherford County. And the numbers I've got, and correct me, Senator Kitchen, if I'm wrong, it's about $500 million worth of infrastructure improvements, including State Route 266 down Jefferson Pike. I think right away on that is about completed, if I'm not mistaken. So some good things are happening, but the wheels of government, as y'all know, often turn slowly. Just look at the judicial building. I mean, we were talking about that when I was first elected up here. So congratulations on y'all to be getting that completed, by the way.
Go back to your original question about local. Keep us informed. I mean, all of you have a district. All of you hear from your constituents in your district. You know, whether it's at church, whether it's a ham breakfast or barbecue, you're hearing from your constituents in your district. So keep the line of communication open with us. And, you know, we'll be happy to contact TDOT and tell them your concerns as well. But, yes, I think we need to definitely work together here to see what locally needs to be done as well.
Anything else, Mr. McAdoo? Okay, Commissioner Phillips.
Thank you, Trey. I know some of you probably remember the last few years, the topic that I've brought up relates to property taxes in Rutherford County, an alternative to property taxes in Rutherford County. And you guys have done a good job in managing state funds, and we have surpluses that I think will help us at some point in time when they're needed, call it a rainy day fund or whatever that might be. And I support that process, by the way, but Rutherford County doesn't have a rainy day fund. And the only means we have in funding pretty much is property taxes, the only means. A number of years ago, the state legislature passed statewide legislations that dealt with what's more commonly referred to as growth taxes, saying that those that had them could not alter them, and those that didn't have them had to reach certain key indicators. I'm concerned, really concerned, as to what this county is going to be facing over the next decade as schools are being built faster than we can pay for them. But we've also reached the point where we talked about roads to where we're building schools where infrastructure is not available to support that type of growth. So we're going to have to do something as it relates to infrastructure in some of those areas. What would be a problem in adjusting that state law to allow counties such as Rutherford County that has higher growth rates to adjust that, what we call our development tax, as our county is growing? What would be the problem with that to give us some alternative to raising property taxes, which none of us want to do? And that's my point, or that's my question. And I'm not saying that this commission or future commissions will use that, but who knows what this county may need over the next decade as we're looking at right now, about a $400 billion building. And in addition to that, supplying the demand for new teachers and operating cost of all those schools and other things. So I'm just asking that question, what would be the problem to give certain counties county rights to address their needs and allow us to at least have an option of raising some type of additional revenue other than property taxes?
Commissioner, I don't see that as a problem at all. I think it would have to first start here, similar to what we just did on the judgeship. It would take a resolution to come to us in order to change that state law, and we would have to get enough votes, and probably there may be some other counties, especially in this donut area around Davidson County, that may want to do the same thing, like Williamson County and Sumner County and Wilson County. They may want to do the same thing. But that would take, the first step would be the resolution requesting that, and then for those to opt in based on the zip codes of those respective counties, they could do that. But I totally agree with you. It's kind of scary to look down the road 10 or 15 years based on the projections of what's coming into Rutherford County. And as you know, those schools have to be built, the teachers have to be hired, the money has to be paid up front, and for that new family who comes in, they get 12 months or 14 months to actually pay that tax, so they get those free services for the first 12 or 14 months after they bought that house. So they pay for it after the fact. They don't pay it on the front end when they close on their house, so their kids are going to school 1 year in arrears, if you will. So it complicates things, and it's going to continue to put stress on a governmental body like this to try to find adequate funding to build bricks and mortar. How do we adjust for that?
pass that legislation, and I'm just asking what might be the, thank you, what might be the problem in high-growth counties to be able to adjust the tax that's already on the books if needed. So thank you.
Well, if you're going to do that, very similar to the request from the chancellor, we do have a bill cutoff. So we would probably, even though it's local, but it would affect other high-growth counties, not just Rutherford. So we'll probably need that before the second week of February, before our bill cutoff, if you want to send us a resolution to create some type of bill.
Yes, to kind of address what you said, being a realtor for 19 years, I've experienced the ups and downs and felt the pains and the joys, but they're still moving here. We're not selling as many houses because due to land values, they're not building starter homes anymore, at least very few in the county. We could easily sell 2,000 or 3,000 starter homes, which are under 1,700 square foot, under 200,000 a year. They're just not building them. That's why existing 12, 13, 1,400 square foot homes have gone up 50 to 100,000 in value over the last year and a half. But they're still moving here. They're just living in apartments now because they can't find the homes here. Eventually, they're going to decide to go out further from Rutherford County unless the land values come down in Rutherford. I don't really see that happening. So we're building larger, more expensive homes, and there's not as many buyers. But they're being sold as quick as we can build them too. And as far as other revenue, just have to see the legislation. Like Senator Ketron said, we have a time frame. We'll have to see it to see how it would go. You'd also run into some resistance from other counties our size or larger or may not want it for their counties, so they wouldn't support our legislation. So it's something, it's not easily said and done just for one. The other thing is, I think it'd be good to have you get suggestions to us. I told the school board this. We need suggestions, meaningful suggestions on legislation, even helping write legislation, because you understand the problems firsthand better than we do. You have to deal with them every month. I know one thing, it's just like, I don't mean to pick on school board or anybody, but they do a good job at educating our children. We have excellent city and county schools. But you've lost almost total control of the building of these schools, yet you were responsible for paying for them. And they don't use the Public Building Authority anymore. And literally, they didn't just save thousands, they saved millions of dollars a year in the school construction. We might want to also possibly look, with the school board's input, is the county commission and the mayor taking over the construction of schools, since you have to pay for them, and then hand them over to the schools. But having the schools have input on how they're built for their needs. So that's another possibility too. Look at ways that we can pass legislation and all across the board to give you more authority and more leeway in making decisions that could save money as well.
Something from an education standpoint, I understand that we're having to build a school basically a year here in Rutherford County. We had a bill, Chairman Charles Sargent had it in the House, and Senator Jack Johnson had it in the Senate, to increase the BEP funding for growing counties. Unfortunately, it did not go anywhere this last session. It will probably start off going somewhere this session, just because we understand every county that's surrounding Davidson is having the same problem. Of course, Rutherford County is our problem. They're not, but we're seeing it as a state as well. So we're trying to increase the BEP formula for growing counties that are having to keep up with the growth that they are seeing in their county.
Chairman, just to pick up a little bit about what Representative Rudd mentioned, many of these issues, they shouldn't be contentious, and a lot of times they are. School choice, for example. Man, if you mention school choice, people look at you like you're a villain. Homeschooling. I mentioned that when I was on the county commission, sitting right here where you're sitting, Representative Rudd. And, encouraging school choice. Be looking at alternatives, year-round school, the online school system. And a lot of folks don't want to ever entertain that. And as a business owner, and many of us are business owners, you can't continue to look at revenue. I mean, with all due respect, Commissioner Phillips, is that, the affordable housing, look at that issue. I mean, it's really sad what these young people are going to face today. I don't know how people afford $1,200 a month in rent right now. And these young people, how are they going to afford to really be able to get by. So we're in a catch-22, but we've got to study the cost of education, the cost of construction of these schools. I was out Rocky Fork Road Middle School, which looks awesome, by the way, and toured it. It looks great, and I'm proud of the efforts of Commissioner Allen and others and the school board with the modifications of Smyrna Middle School and Smyrna Primary School and others, but I really want to challenge y'all to have a serious discussion about school choice with the school board. Case in point, they have a lobbyist that can work, that can always come to us or the school board themselves, but we can't be closed-minded on these issues. There was a bill that was passed a few years ago called, it was the special ed voucher bill. Special ed voucher bill. And what it did, it allowed folks that had a child that was special ed or mentally challenged to have that choice. And who's better prepared to know and care about that young student than that parent of school choice? Well, folks were all upset about it, but the county retained 25% of those monies. So that parent could have went to another alternative to put their child in that facility or wherever they wanted to have them educated at. I don't know why there'd be an uproar about that bill. If the county is going to retain 25% and that parent has another choice, I just don't see how that's a problem. But I really want to challenge all of us, not just y'all or the school board, us up here. And it's not a Republican, Democrat thing, are they, Commissioner Phillips? They really aren't. Because I want to retire in this community, and I've got kids my wife wants grandkids something fierce. I want them to be able to afford to own a home. And sadly, the way it's going, it's going to be the cost is going to be out of control by the time they, 10, 20 years from now.
Just like to add one more to that topic. It's not just as far as setting up a different type of tax or increasing type of a tax. It's also the potential that us at the state sending money back to the counties at the local level. And that was one thing that I know the four of us fought for last year. In the budget, we had a huge surplus, and instead of spending that and having new spending programs, send that back to the counties. The last budget had a $70 million brand new spending program, $70 million capital maintenance program, and that was something that I fought against. And then when we were fighting, having the budget battle, I think the four of us in the House voted to send $50 million back to the counties, and I think the Senate ended up agreeing with that. And so those are some things that for us, I don't know that we're going to have much of a surplus at all this year, but as opposed to growing and spending what we've got, sending it back to the people at local level.
Commissioner Stevens?
I don't have any questions other than to ask you to support the creation of the new judgeship position and then also to keep the I-24 project on your radar.
Good job. Commissioner P.
Something we talked about in the past, and I see someone had added it to the list, but our long-range plans for addressing infrastructure concerns for the increasing traffic commute to Nashville. And I know there was a study that came out, and I'll just head down the line. Any of y'all want to answer that? What do you think the best solution is going to be to this? Start with you, Bill.
Commissioner, that's we all saw the plan that Mayor Berry and City Council came out with, and I think she probably will have enough votes to get that onto the ballot for that $5.2 billion plan that she has. And she and I have been working for 2 years. And I asked her just last week, I was in her office, I said, where'd the tunnel come from? I had no idea that just came out of left field about building a tunnel. However, in order for us to address the issues on I-24 corridor, getting to Nashville, Metro's got to be involved. And so I'm working with her and Robert Schwob, councilman down there as well. I don't know where it's going to lead us because every time we get to a certain level, then autonomous vehicles enter the conversation. We met just a few weeks ago, and Robert Swope, one of the councilmen in Nashville, after we met with the autonomous vice presidents for General Motors, they came down and met with us, one from Pittsburgh and one from Detroit, and they're hosting him at the Detroit Auto Show in a couple of weeks to continue this conversation, because what we told them was that if you're going to start really building autonomous vehicles to help us, then you have a plant right here in Spring Hill, so be building those and providing jobs for us. So you've got autonomous vehicles. I was waiting for to set up a meeting with the new president of CSX. He took over CSX back in probably June, and he asked me to give him a few months to get his arms around CSX, just to open dialogue about, an alternative like rail, using the same rail or putting another rail right beside of their current rail system going in. It's another alternative. Well, he died 3 weeks ago, so I'm back to square one. Shocked because I had told my assistant to go ahead and call him, and we found out that next morning that he had passed away. So these are issues we know with the continued growth coming in, we've got to address them. The city, we've got to reach out to the cities as well to see how we can improve traffic in the cities, Smyrna, Laverne. I don't think it's hit Eagleville yet, but especially Murfreesboro. And like you said, Commissioner, it takes forever to get across town just here in Murfreesboro. Isn't that right, Representative Rudd?
Found that out tonight.
Exactly. So, but it's something that's got to be on our radar, and it's going to take every one of us working and trying to find the best alternative help ease this. I know right now Paul Deggs has told me from TDOT to add another lane going to and from Nashville on each side of the road, and another lane on each exit between here and there. Would cost probably around $1.8 billion to do that. And even if you built that other lane, it's going to be full of cars. But on top of that, there's not enough right-of-way. They don't have enough right-of-way between here and downtown Nashville to build that. So we're looking at every possible option that we can find to see how we're going to address this issue, Commissioner.
I've said for a long time, and even I got a begrudging nodding yes from TDOT people when I talked to them, is the biggest factor in Nashville backing up in downtown and at rush hours in the morning, afternoon, is that 840 North was never completed. The land was bought in Wilson and Sumner counties back in the 90s or 80s, and then it was sold back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and we never completed that loop. So all that traffic, probably about 15% of the traffic in downtown, on the interstates in Nashville downtown, could be taken off those routes if that 840 would be completed. But now, of course, where those farms were, now they're subdivisions. Eventually, it's going to have to be done, in my opinion, in Sumner in parts of Wilson County, if not for anything else, local traffic control. Sumner's in a unique situation that their two largest cities are in the southwest corner. They're not in the center like Rutherford counties. Most counties have their county seat in the middle of the county. Sumner's got their two, it's all bunched down together, so it's mostly rural and subdivisions out from there. But eventually that's going to have to be done. It's going to be very cumbersome. I still remember in the 60s when they cut through neighborhoods to build Briley Parkway. Well, eventually that's going to have to be done to 840 North, because that loop between Dixon and Lebanon is going to have to be completed eventually, because Nashville just can't hold the traffic. It was like they told me that Nashville really doesn't have that big a problem getting traffic around in Nashville. It's on the interstates, and most of that's out-of-county traffic. And it's going to have to be a combination of some form of mass transit, more buses. That's coming. But mass transit, spending $5 billion is not going to be the answer. When you go to Los Angeles, Chicago, Seattle, Philadelphia, Washington, New York, all those have mass transits and trains, and all those have backed up interstates as well. As long as we keep growing, we're never going to get ahead of the traffic problem. And if we stop growing, then we're going to have a severe revenue problem, because it takes us a while to catch up. So, with the growth that's coming to pay for it. So I don't think it's in any perceivable future, because all of you in the cities have done such a good job making this a good place to live, that growth is going to stop. in Middle Tennessee. I think it's going to continue for our lifetimes, probably. It'll have its ups and downs, but so I think it's going to be a combination of affordable mass transit, maybe like Senator Ketron mentioned earlier in years past about having a private-public partnership. We don't have enough population to justify toll roads. For private enterprise to come in and build, they just don't generate the money it would cost to build new highways, and like they do in larger metro cities. But I think a combination of all those things, if we didn't live in a free society, government could say that businesses have to close and open at certain times, but those businesses are interdependent on each other, so you can have one business open early, but the business they need to get parts isn't opening for 2 hours, so they have to sit there. So it's not practical for us to do that. We could encourage some of them to do that, and I think they are, especially in state government. I think they are talking about possibly rotating schedules so that all the employees don't arrive in Nashville at the same time. So those are possibilities, but to me, I think the biggest single mistake that we as a state ever made was not completing 840, and we're paying the price for it right now.
As a conservative Republican, I cannot agree with Megan Barry's $5-6 billion mass transit plan. I believe, yes, we do have a problem, and we need to have solutions to that problem. But as the future goes, where there'll be cars that drive themselves, and there's the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, a monorail or a mass transit system is not going to be our answer. Reversing lanes going in and out of Nashville. We've seen cities do that. Take the HOV lane and make it one toll road for faster access. It would be optional if you would like to pay for that. That's what another city does. Bus on the shoulders is another solution that is not going to cost $5 to $6 billion and can have some impact on our traffic at a very minimum to low cost. And as a conservative, I believe that is our solution to some of our problems. Again, Tim was naming off the cities it doesn't work in. We all been to Atlanta. It's only 4 hours south of here. We've all seen the traffic, and they have MARTA. And so it's just not the answer. And I can't ask hardworking Tennesseans to foot the bill where they're just living paycheck to paycheck and just trying to get ahead in this life for, an extra birthday party or an extra outing with their kid to pay for this that's not going to be a solution to our problems.
Just wanted to add, at the federal level, it's an unknown. I've had several conversations over the past year with Congressman Desjardins on transportation, and I know that this coming year that should be a priority for them, and so that's something from us speaking at the federal level, see what they're going to come up with, and that might alter what we do here at the local and the state level.
Commissioner P., I spoke to former Transportation Chairman Jim Tracy the other day, and I was asking him, y'all know he was recently appointed Commissioner of, I think it's not Ag, it's THCA. And I was asking about transportation, long-range plans, and any hope in the future, and he thought that maybe there's some hope with the Trump administration on some of this infrastructure improvement. He said, in one area with the EPA. And I thought, well, is it really going to make that much difference? And if y'all remember the 840 project that was started, took, 25 years to get it opened up. A lot of it was due to EPA. In fact, Senator Kitchen and I were the first ones to ride on it, weren't we, Senator Kitchen? Remember? Other than TDOT employees, but they cut the ribbon, me and him were heading back to Rutherford County. And but I talked to an engineer the other day. He says, Mike, there was one project that was held up due to the EPA that cost an additional $9 million, I think it was $9 million on one project due to the EPA just holding it up. So hopefully, whether you like Donald Trump or not, hopefully some of this infrastructure discussion and improvement can help. Right after session, I had a gentleman, an entrepreneur, Mark Cleveland, call me. He's developed an app much like Uber and Lyft called Hitch. You could pull it up on YouTube, HYTCH, Mark Cleveland. I asked him to be here tonight, and he had a previous engagement and couldn't do it. But it's a ride-sharing program. It's a ride-sharing app. Doesn't cost taxpayers anything. Folks are commuting to Nashville. They can ride share, carpool. The reason he called me is he heard about me ranting on the House floor about the HOV lane. The HOV lane is not enforced. I mean, it's so bad, like I've said, that a Comcast bucket truck was in the HOV lane by himself, and I'm passing him. So it's really frustrating for those of us who commute to Nashville. And if you commute to Nashville and you see the HOV lane and you see the chronic people that's just violating all the time, you know, I've got people that tell me don't talk about it because they drive in the HOV lane by themselves. Please don't talk about it because I don't want to get a ticket or anything. But they don't enforce it. So let's manage what we've got before because they're pushing for a tax referendum. There's 40 groups, lobbyists, that are pushing for a tax referendum, probably, next year or two, trying to get on the ballot. But what frustrates me is we don't manage what we've got. We got the bus stop you've heard me rant about. They took the shelter down, and they told me it was because it wasn't ADA compliant. Yet they took the shelter down, and there's a man in a wheelchair out there the other day. How does that make sense? And these people, you would think all these people at these top levels are brilliant. Let me give you some earth-shattering news. They're not. They're not, okay? So we all have to agree, and we all do agree. We care about this community. And I appreciate y'all's passion, Commissioner Stevens' passion about the Rocky Fork Road interchange, and because it is challenging. And then I've seen lawmakers in the HOV lane, not me, not Jim Tracy or any of these guys, but I've seen others. Well, I'm stuck in traffic, and they're driving by, and I won't say what kind of car it is because y'all know who I'm talking about. He's from Chattanooga area. But anyways, I do appreciate the discussion because that's what it's going to take to solve these problems.
Thank you. Commissioner Paul Johnson.
Thank you, Commissioner P. That was my concern that I had submitted regarding the infrastructure. But the sobering thought about it is we haven't been able to keep up with the infrastructure because of the growth that has just blossomed here in Rutherford County. How many people would realize that there's 250,000 registered vehicles in Rutherford County? And we are growing by something like 7,000 people a year. Is that right, Mayor, somewhere along the way? And I'm sure everybody that's moving in here is bringing at least 2 vehicles each. And we've all been frustrated by this. I think every time I get out going to Walmart, et cetera, on Old Fort Parkway, I think 155,000 of those cars are on the road at the same time I am on Old Fort Parkway. But we just haven't been able to keep pace with the infrastructure, with the fact that we've got 970 miles of roads that the Highway Department is responsible for alone. So it's the elephant in the room, and we appreciate whatever you can do to maybe alleviate the situation a little bit.
Commissioner, we, if you may remember this, but last year in the budget, we restored the money in 2 different years. We restored the money that was taken in the prior administration, Bredesen administration, when they stripped that out. And we also put in language of legislation that says that no future administration can tap into any of that money. What comes in will stay there with TDOT to go for infrastructure, because TennCare in the last administration, it was not pretty. But it just had blossomed, and you know, there was so much fraud and people coming here and buying it who lived in Florida, getting on TennCare in our state, and it was crazy. So we were in a real crunch, but I think we've addressed that issue and put that money back because we had flush money last year, and so I'm glad we're a little more focused on it than what we have been in the past.
The Highway Department is really appreciative of the fact that all the legislators worked and got $1,400,000 back to the use for the county to use alone that the governor had earmarked for TDOT to take care of. But we appreciate y'all with the Christmas bonus that we got early there for the Highway Department. Thank you.
If I could say one thing, I noticed on your questions, it's something I've actually been working on but been kind of stonewalled on. I hadn't had a lot. It said here on one of your questions is purchasing out-of-state vehicles. sales tax revenue loss. It goes deeper than that, and I understand saving money, and if it's significant, you can justify it, but we're also canceling contracts. It's happened here. It's happened in Smyrna and elsewhere. The state's canceled supplier contracts with local vendors and contracted out-of-state vendors to supply that, sometimes saving a substantial amount of money. We spend millions and tens of millions of dollars a year as tax incentives and building highways to entice out-of-state companies to come here to provide jobs and revenue, which is justifiable. It's a good investment because there's not only are jobs and revenue brought in and tax revenue brought in, but all their suppliers that supply those plants are. I think I've always said, and I told the state when I met with them, that in general services, that in other departments, that it's worth having to spend a little bit more to keep the revenue here and to keep our Tennessee businesses going. We spend so much time and resources attracting out-of-state businesses, I don't think we do enough to keep Tennessee businesses healthy. And I keep pushing for that. It may require legislation because I've gotten nowhere, as far, at least if I have with all my complaints and meetings, no one's told me. But I think, if you're saving 25% or more, I can see some justification for getting out-of-state supplier. But if you're going to take a 10 or 15% increase, the keeping Tennessee jobs here and that revenue, I think it's justifiable to do that because I think the state owes, we should buy our cars here, our supplies here, whether it's hammers, electrical wire, other things that maintenance people at state facilities need. We need to do that here and emphasize that. But if it's a massive savings, we have no choice. But I think we need to do more of that and hope with the delegation we can all work together to resolve that because it's really a serious problem. It's happening across the state. It's not only happening at universities, it's happening at the Tennessee Rehab Facility, it's happening at supply depots, it's happening at maintenance facilities that the state has, and other departments when they need everything from soap and brooms to electrical wire, screws. They're allowed to spend a certain level locally, but then they cut it off and you have to order. And sometimes it's very inconvenient because you have to wait for it to get in, but usually these out-of-state suppliers have in-state warehouses. They just don't make them here. But hopefully we can work on that. But that was a very good point when I saw that about state vehicles.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up on that, Representative Rudd. I talked to Catherine here. She's our budget director in the Senate. She informed me, and I'm going to double check tomorrow with revenue. I'll call the commissioner tomorrow. But she told me that when we purchase vehicles out of the state, that there's reciprocal agreements within those states, and they have to remit those sales tax dollars back to the state of Tennessee when we bring them back here. So, but I want to, I'd like to verify that just to make sure, because if we're not, then we don't need to be buying them out of the state.
Commissioner Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to also thank our delegation for taking the time to come speak with us tonight. Thank you for what you do for us at the state level. I'm very proud of our delegation. I think Rutherford County has a lot to be proud of with who represents them as well. So thank you for doing that. Just a couple quick things. Commissioner Johnson touched on it, some others too, and Representative Rudd and Sparks and others have mentioned some things. One of the things I was going to mention earlier related to infrastructure was some thought process around, I know Senator Ketchum mentioned he's met with Mayor Berry related to some of the transportation. I'm sure others have done that, is some sort of incentives that encourage people to work from home, or companies that come to Tennessee, that we reward that and allow them to work from home. I'm speaking from experience. A lot of the folks that I manage are able to work from home, and that gets that gets cars off the road. Hopefully, lengthens the time before we need to have some of these conversations. You don't want to wait too long, but it's more about relieving some of that traffic, and then ultimately getting better jobs for Rutherford County, where people are driving from Davidson County to Rutherford County now instead of vice versa. So continue to do a lot of what we've been doing to keep Tennessee very pro-growth, pro-business, where those types of companies that do want to expand are forced to look at Tennessee because of the business climate here and how well we take care of not only individuals that are in our community, but businesses that provide opportunities for a paycheck for families. Contrary to popular belief that what you're hearing right now, corporations are not funded or founded to fund the government with taxes. They're there to provide a good service to communities because they found a niche in the market that people will pay for. And we want to keep bringing them here so we can provide opportunities for families in Rutherford County to be able to, to take home a good paycheck. And so I want us to make sure that we continue to do that. Secondary to that, but probably also primary to that, is education as it relates to that. Companies aren't going to come here if our education system is not where it needs to be. And thankfully, under Governor Haslam's leadership and a lot of you sitting there in a delegation, our education has turned a corner where we're starting to make a good mark for ourselves relative to the rest of the country on how we're improving education. And I think Representative Rudd really brought something up a few weeks ago. I think he was talking to the school board about, what are we doing to expand that opportunity? And Mike just mentioned something about, it's not just about school choice, but there's something very moral about making sure that every child has the right education. I'm a parent of a special needs child. I know exactly what Representative Sparks was talking about because I'm in a community that gets impacted extremely hard when there's a lack of school choice. I understand what that looks like, and I'm not just speaking because I've heard it from somebody who told it from somebody else. I know what that's like. But there's got to be ways that we can do it better. And if we're not looking at ways to do that, not only at the federal level, at the state level, and the local level, we're doing a huge disservice to the families that are in our community. And so some of the things that I've brought up relative to those points of discussion with the school board are, can we online educate children? Is it easier for them to stay at home? Do some children learn better at home because they're not as comfortable in a social setting at schools? And not just say, well, we've got to add $400 million in new construction in the next 5 years. The only thing we do is raise property taxes. Sorry, that's not going to work. Nobody on this commission is going to vote for a 50 to 60% property tax increase over the next 6 or 7 years. And then look at our constituents in the face and say, well, we tried everything. We didn't. So continue to challenge yourselves the same way we're challenging you, in the same way that we challenge ourselves as commissioners to figure out what we can do. But finally, as it relates to that, has there been conversation relative to lottery funds being used only for capital school projects? Obviously, when the lottery came in 20 years ago, I forgot exactly when it was, Representative Rudd, I think, had talked about that. Can anyone in our delegation kind of expand on, are we looking at capital projects or a way to fund those capital projects better?
I'll address as well as I can. It's nice your first year to sound the freshman, so I have limited knowledge, but I have researched this. I'm one of 6 that voted against the ReConnect Act. And there's 2 reasons, which is using lottery funds to help older citizens go back to college for free, get a free tuition. The reason why I voted against it is for 2 reasons. Number one, the state is allowed to spend lottery funds on infrastructure, on building schools, on repairing schools, not on actual classroom of the budget, but they can do it there. It's in the Constitution. It's not just a law. It's actually went into the Constitution when they legalized the lottery. So they can do that, but they rarely ever do. They always, which they're doing a great job of, and the ReConnect was a wonderful act, but the other reason why I voted against it was because I even had MTSU officials tell me, please stop sending us students. We don't have the buildings, the teachers, the tools or resources to teach all these people property. It's overburdening universities. We're throwing so many people at them with a free education or free tuition. Not all of them stay the full 4 years. So that they kept saying, slow it down. Well, maybe the best way to slow it down is maybe the next 5 or 6 years we should have delayed ReConnect rather than throw more people at it and used any of those excess funds. It wouldn't have been a dramatic amount, but it would have been a lot to help with your infrastructure, to help with that. It's kind of like when we were in the budget battle and we were throwing amendments on the budget just to throw it out of whack so we could negotiate and try and send more money home. We originally had talked about trying to send part of that money to schools, and the negotiations, they said, well, since it was originally meant for roads, we got to spend it on roads, so we made sure it went to local roads. But that's the only option we have with our Constitution Amendment, lottery funds. We can't spend it just on your regular budget, teacher salaries, anything like that. It has to be on infrastructure. And since they've done ReConnect, it's probably going to be the senator and other reps with more experience to the budget would know better than me, but probably it's going to be another 6 or 8 years before there's enough increased revenue, excess revenue in the lottery if it keeps growing the way it is, so that we'll have money to throw back at the county. I don't know how long it would take, but eventually that lottery will also level out. It did in Georgia and Alabama, and they had to start deciding whether to fund schools with general revenue rather than just the lottery. Eventually it'll peak out where it won't have the dramatic growth it's had, but we're in a unique situation since we have so many states bordering us, they cross the line to buy our tickets. So most states don't have as many states bordering as we do, so that was an added benefit. But they may know more about the growth on the lottery and how long it may be before we have more excess revenue.
I think Representative Rudd's exactly right, but I think it could come faster than that, just based on the projections that the chamber keeps telling us that we're going to have. If we're going to double by 2035, 25 or 35, then more revenue, more people are buying lottery tickets, et cetera. But we do have to, because of those two expenditures that went out for bringing those kids into free education to our TCATs or to our community colleges, and for older adults to come back and get reconnected, try to get some degree. We've got to refill the pot. So, but I think it'll be quicker than the 8 years. But I think you're right, Commissioner. We've got to look at it outside the box. Brick and mortar, we're seeing that even on the private sector side. Brick and mortar is not the way that our country is going. So possibly online courses, instead of building more buildings, multi-million-dollar buildings, and they sit empty from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 o'clock the next morning. Is that the way we need to continue going, or do we go in shifts and start educating? If we've got double the number of students that we have, we're, what are we, 48,000 students now in Rutherford County? And we have, in another 10 years, we have 90,000 students. What are we going to do with them? We can't build schools fast enough or put it back on the property taxes. People are not going to put up with that. So we've got to look for alternatives using technology. It's at our hands, and find different ways to provide better education at some level as expected. Right. We're just zooming up with the amount of money that we put into education. I think we're the fastest improving state in the state of Tennessee, and the money we've recently put in. We've got more money going into BEP, hopefully this year. Teacher salaries are up, and we have more. The governor's got it in his new budget to give teachers more salary, trying to make it better opportunities to get the best teachers. And I think that we do here in Rutherford County. There's not another county, in my opinion, that have such good schools as what we have. But as long as we can give them more money and keep them here, we don't want to lose them to other counties. It's like what's always happened, that we used to train. I remember we used to send our deputies and our ambulance drivers to get them trained. They'd go get post-certified and then get hired by another larger county because we couldn't afford to pay them. And then we had to go steal them from McMinnville or Woodbury to get those same type officers to come in. So we've all got to be working together, thinking better ways and smarter ways to help offset those expenditures coming.
I want to add a little bit to what Representative Rudd said. I was one of the few that voted against the final bill as well, and for several same reasons that he did. As far as it being a new spending program, we had needs for infrastructure and MTSU as well. And what a lot of people don't realize is that if it's paying for tuition, that doesn't necessarily cover the cost of a student going there. At MTSU, for 3 credit hours, it's about, in-state tuition costs roughly $800. Out-of-state tuition is about $2,800. The actual cost for them to educate that student is around $1,800. So it doesn't cover that cost. And so, we would be sending an influx that we can't offset. And so that was another reason why I voted against it.
Representative Rudd is correct. In the when we pass the lottery and it's in the Constitution, it can go for higher ed or infrastructure. Of course, this governor's drive to 55 was his main objective for workforce development, to attract companies here and to keep economical growth happening in Rutherford County and in the state of Tennessee. We had to have a workforce, and that's with training at a TCAT or a 2-year associate's degree. So I understand. Of course, he's trumpeting out. We will be getting a new governor. It'll depend on what the focus is and where that governor really wants to see the lottery money when it's built back up go to. But right now, with the governor and their Drive to 55 initiative he was proposed and has seen out his entire term, then higher ed was our focus. But there's always a possibility for us to refocus the lottery money when it's built back up.
Commissioner Turner, I appreciate your passion for special ed kids, and I know, your daughter's Kinsley, right? And a beautiful little girl, and your firsthand experience. I shared this at the school board. In Nashville, you see a lot of lobbying, you see a lot of lobbyists. The people don't really have a lobbyist, and I often say it's your state rep who's got to be your lobbyist, got to be your voice. At the school board, I mentioned that special ed voucher bill that helps parents of special ed children and mentally disabled, and they would have saved money on that bill. But I seen a woman, I don't know if y'all remember this, about 2 years ago, she was literally arrested for truancy. Her child didn't make it to school. They came and arrested a mother for having her child. And this wasn't just a child. This was a pretty good-sized guy. He was probably 16 or 17. It was a sad situation. I went to court with her. They wouldn't let me in court with her. But she had no lobbyist. She had no advocate. She had no voice. It was shameful that existed, So I've seen that firsthand that happened in this county. This isn't Chicago we're talking about, New York, Pittsburgh, California. It's right here. This happened in our community. And it's sad that went on. But we've got to have a serious discussion about some of these things, and it's really unsustainable, whether it's education. College tuition debt 4 years ago was $1 trillion. The debt was $1 trillion. Now it's over $1.4 trillion. It's almost doubled in just 4 to 5 years. What's being done about it? I really don't say anything. I've asked the Vice Chancellor, what are you doing about textbook affordability? And I like the Vice Chancellor, and not trying to be disrespectful, he says, Mike, I don't have an answer for you. I'm like, man, you're in the top position and you have no answer. That's what's sad. People with graduate degrees and doctorate degrees have no answer. So it's sad when people don't have an answer, when we've got problems, and we've got constituents with loaded down with student debt. So the whole system really, it's unsustainable. There's no way you could continue to spend the monies we've been spending where costs are skyrocketing. And whether it's the sheriff's department, whether it's public safety, or whether it's education, you got to get your costs under control. And I think the mayor's trying to do some of that with, and the judges with the drug court, mental health court, veterans court, New Vision Baptist Church, reaching out to some of these inmates, Franklin Road Baptist, Bel Air Baptist, and others are doing some good job with some of this stuff. But really, the path that we're on is it's unsustainable. There's no doubt.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, are there any commissioners in our audience? If you would like to come to a table, I'll call on Commissioner Will Jordan at this time.
I do it from here. All right. I appreciate you all being here tonight, and Representative Rudd touched on what I asked to put on the list, the purchasing state vehicles out of state, and I didn't put the sales tax revenue loss because that's just a drop in the bucket, in my opinion, about what it does to this state. I was eating lunch with Keith McCullough, who's here in the audience today. He's a fleet manager at Murfreesboro Ford a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about how states surrounding us are passing laws and have passed laws that state bid vehicles have to be bought within their state. Well, there has to be like a 10% savings or something like that, which is unrealistic on a $35,000, $40,000 car or vehicle. And I've got some information I'll give you guys before you leave. In 2017, the state of Tennessee leased approximately 700 vehicles from Acme Leasing out of Connecticut. And these cars were supplied out of Mississippi. Well, that's around $25 million in taxpayer dollars that went to Connecticut and Mississippi, and that money is getting spent there, and it's not left in our economy. If all the surrounding states are going to pass rules that say we can't buy our cars, that our guys here can't sell the cars there to keep their tax revenue local. Why don't we do something to keep our tax revenue local also? Representative Rudd, you mentioned it a while ago, everything from hammers to mops to whatever, but and this isn't necessarily a Rutherford County issue. This is something that I would task one of you with to figure out how to come up with a bill or whatever. But I just believe it ought to be a level playing field. Now, this is, statewide, off state contractors, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of vehicles. And that's tens and tens of millions of dollars that's going to other states. And once that money's out of our local revenue stream, it's gone. But if it goes here or goes to Columbia or Nashville or Clarksville or Memphis or wherever, that money gets spent by the salesmen, the mechanics, whoever, the people that wash the cars, and that money stays in our economy and helps educate our kids and raises tax revenue and stuff. So that's what I'm here. I'm going to give each one of you a packet. It's got Keith's information on it. He can help you put information together. But if it just needs to be a level playing field. If we can't sell cars from our local dealers in Alabama, then they ought not be up there selling them here to the state. I'm not talking about the highway departments or trying to tell local sheriff's departments how to do their business. But if you're going to buy off a state contract, in my opinion, it ought to be going to a dealer in Tennessee and keeping that money local. And I appreciate whatever support you can give to something in that form.
I agree with thank you. Of course, a lot of them, I would imagine, are specialized vehicles, either certain size, weight, or for their job, or equipped in a certain way that maybe a Tennessee supplier doesn't. But certainly if the vehicle is just for transportation and it's made here, regardless whether it's in Connecticut or whoever gets the contract, they should give priority to buy a vehicle made here if possible, if it meets the requirements. I agree with that.
Commissioner, thank you for bringing that up, and I look forward to seeing that because I serve and been former chairman of Fiscal Review, and we review all contracts that come before us in the bipartisan group that for those members that sit on Fiscal Review. And I did question that back in October when that lease contract came through, and it was that one firm was the only bid that General Services got on the lease. Not for purchase, but for lease, and it was the only bid, so that's what they ended up going with. And I was flabbergasted that surely there's some other leasing companies out there that want to lease 700 vehicles. I don't know how complicated that would be, but it's something we definitely need to look into. And if it means bringing legislation that to do like other states, then we need to get copies of that legislation and do the same thing. But I agree with you. We need to keep that money here. And I did reach out to you guys at University Ford, to your owner. I talked to him when Kermit Davis had the deal over there in your showroom, and I talked to your owner about because that was just 2 days prior to that Fiscal Review Committee meeting, and I reached out to him afterwards and said, I'd like to get with you. I haven't done that yet, but would like to talk to you guys about that, about how you all can create a new leasing company and at least start leasing those vehicles from you guys. I don't like Connecticut. We'll be happy to look into that for you.
Thank you. Commissioner Schaefer.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for a couple of years ago when you passed the GI Bill allowing veterans to get like 12 years, 14, whatever the federal government does, because that really helped them a lot. And also, I appreciate the increase in the litigation tax that came through last year. Only problem is it seems like the indigent rate in this county jumped sky high too, so it's not quite coming through. And well, I know quite a few of y'all didn't like the IMPROVE Act. I happen to love it because finally, after 3 years of coming from Laverne to Murfreesboro and hitting Karen's Custard on Murfreesboro Road in Smyrna, and the next 3 miles to Florence Road, it was either hitting or dodging potholes. And now I've got a smooth drive, so I appreciate that. But what I want to get to is something that was touched on, and I call it unfunded mandates. And we have a lot of them. We have more from the state than we do from the federal government. But I want to get the education part and how it's hurting us. And like Representative Rudd said a little while ago about cost of schools and doing whatever with the commission and the school board. Well, everything I've seen, and it's been given to me in the last few years, we have the lowest cost per square foot of anybody in the mid-state. And I think that's pretty true with what we have. We've used things, the geothermal and metal roofs, I don't know, 12, 14 years now. Right after I came on the commission in 2002 is when it started. And so I think we're doing good there. And another thing is we run about 115th out of 137 school systems in this state on per pupil spending. So with the results we get, because somebody, I think it was the senator said, or somebody did, that thinks we got the best one in the school system in the state here in Rutherford, but I won't go that far. I'll say we're in the top 5. I'll do that, because I think I can be pretty safe in saying that. And the results turn out good. And yet we're 115th roughly, very slightly each year. But what I want to get to is I've got figures from finance from the school board. They're 2 years ago, but he had them right there on his computer. And it was the year that we received, the state started paying the 11th month of insurance, not the 12th month that came last year. But we paid on the certified teachers, the county paid, I want to read it right, I don't want to get wrong figures here, $34 million over the BEP for those teachers. What happened? Why? Because one, we had to have more teachers because the formula doesn't work when they say 20 kids per kindergarten or something like that. We can't move them from one side part of the county to another part, et cetera. Things like that, plus graduation coaches. With the laws that have come out in the last few years, you got to have them if you're going to get kids through school. Whether to get, you got to babysit them a lot. I mean, that's the fact of life with a lot of them. And RTI. It's not now, but it used to be Roy Waldron, Laverne Primary, Laverne Lake, and Laverne Middle were all in my district. And I've gone through those schools, and like Waldron, you go in there and they get kids that don't speak a word of English come in every week. They come across the line from Antioch, they move up there, then they come down here and get into our schools, and they have to take a teacher or an aide for 1, 2, maybe 3 kids to get them. The county's paying for all that, for those aides in this. And so on these certified teachers that we got to have, and the ones that you still have to fill the requirements, in 15-16 we paid in this county $70 million to cover those teachers. And I think somewhere in there, it seems to me that the state is not covering their responsibilities because they're requiring, I look, when the Achievement School District, big up here in Nashville, in Davidson County this last year, they've had a big controversy over McNeely Bend and a couple others that they're trying to kick back and forth, whether in the Achievement School District, how well it does or what. But I just want to bring those up, and I think that's something that if we can send something up to you, as I'm with Commissioner Phillips, is we need some means that we can draw on, because our finance people have said 1920 is going to be the year these things hit us. The building down the street, the $71 million is the bid on Rockvale. 4 years ago, this spring is when Stuart Creek started. They graduated their first class this spring. That school cost $45 million. Rockville is almost identical, except it's either 20 or 40,000 square foot less. And how much? 71 from 45? That's a lot to happen in basically 4.5 years from when the first bid went in.
Parks?
Commissioner Schaefer, you know, I like your point about, the kids that can't speak English and those teachers that have to be hired that are bilingual that can teach them. When I was on the commission, we had Bart Smith that used to do the tag enforcement. I don't know if anyone does that anymore, but that's one area that somebody ought to look at, is just looking at the tag enforcement at some of the schools. Not just the employees, just look at who's coming through there, Now, I don't know how difficult that would be to enforce. We do have a lot of spillover from Davidson County that's coming into Rutherford County to utilize the school system. But these costs, and you kind of hit on illegal immigration. I mean, that's something that a lot of folks don't want to talk about, but it has affected our costs. There's no doubt, whether it's the ER visits or schools or health departments or wherever, it has impacted the county and the city and the state budget as well. So thank you.
Commissioner Schaefer, sometimes it's hard to understand the BEP formulas. For the 8 years I spent in this room and then 16 years in the Senate, it still gets confusing to me since it's been into effect. But there are so many different tentacles for the BEP, but Comptroller Wilson, I know he was quoted of saying that the BEP is a funding formula, not a spending plan. And it's hard to figure out because, like with Memphis gets paid $5,023 per pupil in Shelby County, whereas Nashville gets $34.90. Carter County gets $5,663. So it's all based on that population. You don't think that would be right, that a smaller county like Carter is getting another $600 more than what Shelby is, or even over $1,000 more than what Nashville is. But the Comptroller's Office did, and for those of you on the County Commission that want to look at this, you can go on to the Comptroller's website, and it's the Russell Moore is the director, and he's the director of educational accountability in the Comptroller's Office. And the ORE, just go in and Google ORE website. And this past spring, they created a calculator, a BEP calculator. So you'll be able to go in, at your computer in the morning and look up based on the number of students that we have. And when you're working on your budget coming up this year, you can have the same numbers, or at least question what the numbers you're getting from the Department of Education when they bring their school budget. So that's a nice new tool that the Comptroller's Office has provided. But we spent $4.4 billion last year in BEP, and we are continuing to increase that, and I think we'll still see more money coming in this year's budget. I know the governor's already proposing that. Our sales numbers are way down from what they were previously. We won't have the same amount of flush cash as we had previously. We're only looking at about a 2.6% growth, so that equates to about $200 million in excess cash. And then we got to take care of TennCare expenditures, the opioid crisis, juvenile justice reform that we're planning on doing. So there's a lot of tentacles and hands out for that $200 million that's going to be our challenge for us up here when we go back next week to try to figure out how we're going to try to split that up. But I know we'll still continue to give, increase our BEP monies. And then it's up to the locals to figure out where to spend it. So is Rockville, what kind of stadium are they getting? Are they going to get one nicer than Stewart's Creek? for football? Are they getting a swimming pool? All those things. Football field, to carry the dummies out. I used to have to carry them out when I was at MTSU because we didn't have a gator. They didn't. Coach wants more than what the previous coach had, or these teachers want this type of lab in the chemistry, and more things. We just continue to feed it. So it's up to the local bodies to decide where that BEP formula is spent.
I had brought this up. Actually, you'd alluded to the comptroller, Senator Ketron. I went to Justin Wilson in a meeting, and I asked, can you roughly estimate the number that we send to the counties of unfunded mandates? That's not just schools, that's other things. And he said it's somewhere between 100 and 120 million. It's hard to get an absolute ID because some of the legislation was passed 50, 60 years ago. Then some of it's mandated by the federal government that's passed through money, that in order to get that money, we had to pass legislation. So I said it'd be nice to have a complete list, and some counties are affected by mandates and others aren't. It just depends on special legislation that was passed. So I'll ask you to do, the county commission and the budget, your finance office, do the same as I asked the schools to do. Be our partner in this, help us write legislation, identify all the unfunded mandates and the legislation that generated it for you, and that would give us a great argument to overturn it or change it or justify it or not justify it. So help us be a partner in writing that legislation, because you experience it every day. Like schools, they were really complaining about testing. I said, well, the state's going to require the testing. They want the results. So come up with a way to give them the results that's not as bad for you and our students, and help us write that legislation, and they might accept it. But if we just say no or fund the mandates, I don't know if that's going to happen. But if we can start chipping away at it, either from lottery funds or from changing certain laws or giving you more authority to fund those unfunded mandates or for us funding them. But first we've got to identify them and the legislation that generated them so that we'll have an argument. Thank you.
Every bill has a fiscal note on it, and normally it will show what it will cost the state, and then it will show what it brings back to the locals. And just like the school bus safety belt bill, to put seat belts on school buses, it was passed, but it got hung up in finance because the cost to local districts would be so huge that, most counties or city school systems could not pay for it if they had to buy a new bus, because it would add about $10,000 per bus. So it got held in finance. So hopefully, this year we'll be able to give money to the counties or the cities that own their own buses in order to be able to protect our children and with seat belts. We try to, but of course there are always things that our fiscal notes are wrong, and it costs more to the counties than what the state thought it would. So I echo what Representative Rudd said. Keep a line of communication open with us. If you see something coming down the line that you look at the fiscal note and think, no, it's going to cost us way more, contact us so we can go to fiscal review and say, hey, we need to put the brakes on this, or hey, we need to look at how we're going to help fund this for the counties, because it's not fair to pass that burden on to the counties.
Thank you. Commissioner Allen?
I have three things I wanted to mention. They're all education related, and they're really not questions so much as they are suggestions. A few years ago, I had an opportunity to go to the Cumberland 10 regional conference that's all the surrounding counties and the Power of 10 conference. And Commissioner Shore spoke that day, and he said that, of course, he has a fixed budget, and he has to take care of 95 counties with the amount of money he has. So one of the strategies that he used was that if a local community would provide matching funds, the more money they would show up with, the higher they'd move up on the list. And so I really like that idea when we are able to utilize lottery funds for schools. If there was any way in the world that you could use matching funds for Rutherford County, if, Rockville High School could cost us $35 million or even $50 million as opposed to $71 million, that'd go a long way in helping us not increase property taxes. And so that, along with helping us, being our champions and helping us support the development tax increase, that doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost our current citizens anything. It costs our new citizens something. And those are the ones you mentioned. that those students pay their taxes in arrears, they would have to pay $8,000 a year in taxes to pay for educating those kids. And so it takes them and every dollar would have to go just to education, not to anything else that infrastructure was provided. So it takes a long time for that growth money to catch up to end up for that person to be paying for themselves. The other thing I want to mention is that when you have the opportunity to distribute growth funds, I know I've said this to you before, I just wanted to remind you, if you can look at actual numbers in growth as opposed to percentages, I think that's a much more real way to distribute those funds, because if you have a small county who's had a 5% increase versus a Rutherford County that's had a 2.5% increase, we're going to have a lot more kids. We're going to be building a school where they might not be building a school. So if you could look at actual seats as opposed to always looking at things in percentages and trying to balance it out, I think that's a more realistic and equitable way to distribute those growth funds. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is because of the Tennessee Promise and Tennessee Reconnect, we know that Montlow College here locally is already, trying to raise money for building 3, buildings 4 and 5 could really be built right behind those in quick succession. The way the TBR funding is set up, those local colleges, the community colleges, have to raise 10% matching funds. That is very onerous on those small colleges. A community college does not have the same alumni base that a four-year institution will have. And even though Montlow is the #1 feeder to MTSU, once those students move on, they identify as an MTSU graduate, not necessarily so much as a Montlow graduate. So that's something I'd really encourage you to look at as well, is that if there was some other way that maybe those, especially those community colleges, didn't have to come up with that much local money, because that ends up, again, being an unfunded mandate on the local community, because we're the ones they come to and ask for that money. So,
well, if you can talk any one of these four into becoming budget chairman in the House, that might be another alternative way to get it, because Columbia State and Franklin, that's how they got their alternative money and didn't have to raise the 10% under Chairman Sargent as budget chairman. I used to represent Columbia, so we knew at some point in time that the campus would outgrow in Franklin, just because that's where the people were. We're out going to grow the main campus in downtown Columbia, just like Montlow is outgrowing the campus in Tullahoma. So which one y'all want to run for that?
I wish I could become budget chairman, but Commissioner, I appreciate your work, Commissioner Allen, on Montlow, and Commissioner Stevens as well. It's a good things happening in Rutherford County, as y'all know. The new, 79,500 square foot building coming on board at $27 million cost is really pretty exciting to see the growth, but of those students. But I carried a piece of legislation this year to try to bypass that, and they quickly killed it real quick. I mean, I never even got hardly to the committee before it got killed real fast. But they promised me that this building is going to happen this spring. We're going to break ground. So they said, Mike, we're getting it done. We're getting it done. So there's no need for your bill. We're going to get it done. And I'm going to hold them to that. So hopefully we'll be out there with some shovels here this spring and be breaking ground in that school.
Mr. Baum?
I want to go back to transportation for just a second. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the likelihood of a public-private partnership to help pay for some of these transportation initiatives like light rail.
Commissioner, when I brought that bill a couple of years ago, I had seen what other states had done. The Golden Gate Bridge was a P3. And so was the Intercontinental Railroad back at the turn of the century. It was a P3, public-private at that point in time. And I knew that looking down the road that the public cannot continue to pay 100% of all infrastructure projects unless Mr. Trump decides to throw some money down this way. We've got to reach out to a Skanska, a Turner Townsend, one of the larger type Bombardier, some of those that would be willing to come, actually run it, build it, maintain it, and we bond it over a 40-year period for some type of infrastructure, mass transportation. All we have to do once a private sector company approaches us, the legislation's already intact. The next step would be if let's just say that Turner Townsend came up to us and said, hey, we're interested, or even Siemens. Siemens is doing this globally. If they came up and said, we're interested in putting in some type of light rail using CSX rail line, you know, they weren't real honest with me when I first talked to them 2 years ago. They said their right-of-way was only about 10 feet wide or 12 feet wide, and it's actually 36. I got several property assessors to start doing some background checks, and especially the property assessor in Nashville, and found out that right-of-way was large enough. So if they were to come, Siemens were to come to us and say, let's do this, then we have one other step, and that is to create a P3 office at the state level. We held off on it until that occurs. We will create an office to handle the P3 appropriations, and because that all the money has to channel through the state. We would be the public sector that would control those funds and make sure that they, you know, did what they were going to do. You have to be very careful. There was a toll bridge or a toll highway down in Texas and went bankrupt. It was a firm that they should have checked out and didn't have the wherewithal to do it, and now they're stuck with, they just had to tear down the toll bridges, and now they're stuck with having to fund something they probably wouldn't have funded if they didn't have at least 50% or more, you know, contracted into a contract. But, you know, that's it's an option, and I think we have to encourage those type of private sector companies to come forward if we're ever going to do anything on mass transportation. Bus on shoulders, you know, that's a possibility. That's, you know, somebody could come forward on bus on shoulders to help increase that emergency lane. Right now they're going to have to go in and tear those up and build them up to where they can handle the load. However, even if they have a light changer inside the bus that can change the light where they can keep going forward, if there's a terrible accident, they're going to be stuck just like every other car is on that same northbound or westbound lane. But the infrastructure is there as far as the state law for the P3.
To kind of follow up, and you'd mentioned President Trump. I think for regardless of someone's political persuasion, you better hope that the Republicans increase numbers and Trump stays in, because he wants to do something for the states, and the Republican-controlled Congress wants to do something, and that's to send block grants for health and transportation. That basically based on, I think, in a combination of income and population, they're going to send the states, they want to send the states money, and as long as you get what the federal government results want, you can spend it and do whatever you want with it. That'll give us and you a lot more freedom if we can have those federal block grants without all the red tape that's attached to them now. So let's hope and pray that block grants come down in the next couple of years.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Reed?
Excuse me for being at your back, but I do want to bring up one thing we discussed last year at this time, and of course you're going to look at me like, oh, we got a bad penny here, keeps coming back every year. But a statement was made here by Representative Sparks that I really liked, and it was I think the advice he had received that if you have not been touched by the problem, you probably do not realize that it exists. And I think this has touched on a lot of the things that has been said here tonight, because when you go out into our districts, you run across those people that have been touched by the problem, and we realize that. And what I'm discussing or talking about is the fact that I am still interested in broadband. The rural areas of this county still do not have broadband. I've sat here tonight and we've talked about education, and we talked about classes online. We've talked about school online. We've talked about a lot of things online. You know, if we don't have that line, you're not online. Just today I was told that, you know, my cloud is full. And, I mean, I'm surprised when my cloud is full. I mean, that's a hard thing to talk about. But we're talking about a lot of things here that if we have areas of this county right here that we don't even touch by broadband, it doesn't exist. I know in the past legislature we dealt with that issue. We had a bill that was passed. I appreciate each of you that was involved in that and what you were doing there. But we still have the situation out here in our rural areas that we are needing help with, and we're needing to do this. In the recent Eagleville Christmas parade that I know 3 of you were there braving that cold, that parade stopped in the middle of 41A there, and a lady with 2 children in tow come up to the side of my truck. And she said, "Commissioner Reed, you were at my house 4 years ago, and you were talking about broadband. Are you still dedicated for us getting broadband out this way?" Now, I want to tell y'all, I stood there and told her, yes, I'm very much dedicated to getting broadband in this area and for the rural areas of this county and the rural areas of Tennessee, because those people are touched by it. And there are other areas of this county that are not touched by it, and they just don't realize the same problems. That, you know, you're operating on a hot spot, that if it gets cloudy or if the wind blows, you've lost it. You've lost your connection. You don't have it. And I often thought about this, that if we had handled our water and our electrical situations in the rural areas the same way we have handled our communication in the rural areas, the last few nights we'd had a lot of people cold and thirsty because it just wouldn't have been there. So what I'm asking you, I guess, is what I'm saying, continue your efforts to support this and to get us more involved in getting broadband in these rural areas. I know the vice mayor here and myself are working with a situation in Eagleville right now that we're trying to get some work there. We're trying to get some fiber optic in that area. We're going to experiment out there to see how that goes. It's a fiber optic project that if we can run the fiber optic to where we want to go, we can also come off of this fiber optic and go to towers that will reach out into more rural areas out that way. But this is just a drop in the bucket to what we have approved in this legislation. So possibly down the road, not this year, more than likely, but maybe in the near future, we may have more legislation that we can help those rural people out in that area. And I appreciate your help.
Commissioner, we've talked about this often. I think the 2 districts that this touches the most are Representative Terry's and I, because we have such large rural areas as well as urban areas. And that's true. I think people that live in town take it for granted, or in suburbs close to town, they have it and they don't realize in today's modern world, to take care of medicine, purchases, drugs, teach kids in school, they need broadband access, internet access, and they don't have it. Now, government can't provide that service, but we finally helped. It's not as good as I want it to be, but we untied the strings to make let private enterprise come in. But private enterprise isn't flush with money. They have to do it on a schedule. Like Middle Tennessee Electric told me last year, to do their entire area, which I think is 3 counties, it would be $700 million expense. And they want to do that, but they have to make sure they're going to be able to do it and it's economical for them on a time schedule. I talked to rural broadband services in one out of Arkansas and one that's in West Tennessee, and they said they have intentions of coming to Middle Tennessee. They just can't do it right now, but at least we've freed them up that can. We're not restricting them from coming in now. We've made it a lot easier. And another possibility to get this service is for Comcast or AT&T to team up with some of these broadband companies or the electric membership in a partnership and do it. They're free to do that too under this legislation. So it takes time. At least the government is getting out of the way. It's just a matter of private enterprise and electric cooperatives can't raise taxes to justify this. They have to do it when they have the money, but at least they can do it now. It's just economically a matter of when they can.
Commissioner, thank you for bringing that up. You know, the bill we passed back in the spring was that broadband accessibility to help the economic growth in the rural areas. You haven't seen it yet, but next week I'll be introducing a bill on behalf of AT&T, Comcast, and others. You'll start hearing a lot of it. It's going to be called the Small Cell Bill. Okay, so in order to open up, we, the state of Tennessee, are moving the same place that the rest of the world is already ahead of us. Korea, Japan is already on 5G. Many of you sitting out here today have 4G LTE on your phones. So don't buy another phone right now. Wait till this 5G comes into place. But in order to open up, that's why AT&T tried to get UVerse. When I carried that bill several years ago, they wanted to be able to compete. And then they tried to get everybody off of UVerse and go to DirecTV on the dish, because the 5G opens up that bandwidth for broadband, because from telemedicine to texting to everything has to travel, but it can't travel as far as 4G all to a big tower. So there's going to be a lot more smaller cells on telephone poles, on buildings, etc. The pushback when we introduce this bill next week is going to be from the electric companies and some of the rural telephone companies, because they'll want to come in and rape the private sector companies that want to install that. So some of the arguments for years since I've been down there, there's always been arguments with Comcast and pole attachments. So you'll get in some areas, they've been quoted anywhere from $250 a pole to some cities want to charge $2,500 a pole to put a small dish on in order to send that data through the airstream. So that's going to be a battle that we're going to face over the next few weeks. When I introduce that bill, I'm not sure, they haven't told me who the House sponsor is, but we've got to get over that and say this is the best thing for our state. There are 6 other states that have already passed it, and it's working very successfully there. But like you say, in Eagleville, Rockville, when it takes an hour and your computer sitting there spinning to download your tax return, one form, compared to once we get to 5G, it's going to be 1 gigabit speed. So that's faster than most of us have right now at home. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch, but I'm looking forward to carrying that piece of legislation.
Commissioner, thank you. Thank you for your passion for helping those folks. You know, pretty much all my district has broadband or some Comcast or something. But Senator Ketron hit on the point about the pole attachments. Early this year, y'all remember Donald Trump was in town over visiting Hermitage. I sit on business utilities, and the pole attachment situation, to me, they shouldn't continue to have those variable costs like that. The prices should be coming down, because the ratepayers are paying that. So for them to sit there and hold them hostage and I see them holding them hostage, and then thus it's holding the consumer itself hostage on that. If you'll do a Google search, Mike Sparks, Donald Trump letter, and you'll see people said there's nothing you can do about TVA. That's what they all told me. That's what the lobbyists said. There's nothing you can do. I said, no, there is something we can do. We got a new administration. Yeah, it's at the federal level, but let's try to do something. So we're all in this together. And the pole attachments, I know the electric companies are very territorial when it comes to those issues. But if these companies are going to provide access on those poles, let them provide access. So we're closer than we were 5 years ago. Everyone would agree. And I always remember what Mike Turner, the Democrat leader. Remember, I happened to see him one day, and I was brand new, and I said, "Hey, you want to have lunch?" I took him to lunch. Mike Turner, he's like, 320 pounds, 6'4", and he ended up buying my lunch. It was kind of cool. And we got talking about issues, and he says, "Mike, just remember," he said, "things take a long time up here." He said it took him 12 years to pass the lottery. So these things do take a while, unfortunately. I get frustrated just like you get frustrated, just like Commissioner Phillips and Commissioner Gooch and others get frustrated. But we are closer on that. Now, do your Committee of Public Works, do y'all talk about broadband in Public Works? I guess that'd be the committee it goes through, right? Would it come through there? Okay. I mean, maybe we could, Senator Kitchen, maybe we can get some of those folks that's involved to come to your Public Works meeting. Just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
We understand what Commissioner Reed is saying, and again, out in Eagleville and Rock Valley, if we're asking, as Commissioner Turner said, for people to work at home and give incentives, we've got to have that broadband out there for them to work. So I see more legislation coming down. Of course, as Representative Rudd said, with competition and opening up for more people to be able to do broadband and run fibers and cables, it will help. Competition is always a good thing, and so it is coming slowly but surely, and we're fully aware of the problem and the need for all of Rutherford County to have broadband.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. Okay, Representative Rudd, Representative Sparks, Representative Dr. Terry, Representative Don White, and Senator Ketron, thank you so much for giving us your time. Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for a great conversation and good questions. One announcement, Ms. Stevenson is here. She has early delivery packages for each of you regarding the judge decision that you're going to make. So you can pick up from her before you leave, please, those summary application packets that she's prepared. Thank you.
I also would like to remind commissioners that the deadline to file your ethical statement of interest is at the end of this month, unfunded state mandate. So, yes, sir.
Real quick, y'all probably know I stirred up some controversy this year talking about history. The African American Heritage Society, they were here earlier, wanted to recognize Mary Watkins. This is their calendar. They're selling them for $20 a piece. If anybody wants one, let me know. Commissioner Rudd's on here with me, Alan McAdoo's on here with me, and Representative Brian Terry's on here with me. A lot of the history is in the African American churches. If you want a calendar, just see me or contact Mary Watkins. Thank you.
Any other business? If not, this meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.
We're supposed to.